Okay, this is going to be a little bit scrappy, but welcome to the Canadian Culture Wars Report. My name is Melanie Bennett, and I attended a very interesting teacher training, I guess you could call it. It was a Zoom thing that anyone could attend. Teacher training on social justice last night, and let me tell you, it was full of very, very juicy tidbits. This training was 2.25 hours long. I'll provide a link that you can watch the whole thing if you like, but I just pulled out a few clips just to give you an idea of what they were talking about. So before we start with the clips, I just wanted to give an overview of how this started. Obviously, you have your obligatory land acknowledgement. Then he places this in a framework of the systemic oppressions, white supremacy, colonialism, patriarchy, ableism, classism, heterosexism, you name it, they're all there. He touched on the anti-oppressive and intersectional approaches because, well, this is education and that's really important in education, apparently. And obviously, my favorite, learn, unlearn, and relearn. So not cultish in the slightest. All right, let's get to our first juicy bit, and we'll go straight in with the critique of anti-woke.
You folks could do this workshop, let me tell you. Well, this idea of psychic disequilibrium is really what's happening now in our schools, not only in North America, but in other parts of the world. And we have this pushback coming from the outside and also from the inside, indicating that there is a disapproval and resistance to creating curricula that would affirm and celebrate identities, particularly those that have been historically marginalized. And you've seen the headlines, both here and in the United States. These are from both countries. And it's disconcerting. But as disconcerting as it is and disturbing, we need to ask ourselves, so what is going around? What's circulating? What is fact and what is fiction? Who is listening? Who is listening and who might be actually internalizing the information? And therefore, who is being impacted by it? And what is at the root of the resistance? Where is this resistance coming from? So we're talking about anti-woke. And I'm glad someone brought this up. And it's interesting. I'll share with you a few posters that have come across my desk. And I have to laugh at some of them. This idea that free speech is not allowed, how ideas are manipulated and twisted a bit in order to serve an agenda that's not really meeting the needs of all of our citizens. And then there's this kind of alarmist fear of threat that's being communicated with all of this propaganda that can really inspire people to listen and say, you know what, maybe I need to listen to this. Maybe my kids are in danger. So woke is really, anti-woke rather, is really a movement like all movements that have predated it, that opposes diversity, equity, and inclusion. We want to maintain the status quo. We don't want to bring other people to the table. And we don't want anyone to address systemic oppression and discrimination. With this particular movement, what I'm hearing is these arguments that when people are being asked to not mention or speak about particular groups in negative ways, they're claiming that it's an infringement on their right to freedom of speech. That there's this use of misinformation and disinformation to make their points. There's reliance on what many people call pseudoscience, like making up research about what trans identities are and how people become trans and so on. This idea that we are being indoctrinated. If we put critical race theory in schools, we'll be indoctrinating our kids to hate white people. It has nothing to do with education. That inclusive curricula is not age appropriate. In other words, when we're talking to grade ones and grade twos about same-sex family, somehow that is going to move into conversations around sexual activity. That academic merit and not demographic background should drive learning in educational institutions. In other words, we should be paying attention to those students who are succeeding rather than looking at the ways in which the reasons why other students are not succeeding and what are the systemic pieces that are preventing that from happening. And then this idea that what's wrong with the status quo? It's worked this long, it's working for me fine. What's your beef? So let's explore some of this. It's not new. Anti-woke is just really another name for bigotry, prejudice, discrimination, anti-inclusion, anti-equity. So although it's presented as a new insight, it's not new. It's just good old-fashioned bigotry. So what is woke really about? Well, it's recognizing and confronting systemic inequities and being able to identify them and understand how they operate and how people are being impacted. And it's also finding ways to engage in meaningful dialogue and collective action to help create real change. In my mind, being woke is simply about good citizenship, civic responsibility, altruism, nothing new. It's what sensible people have been doing, caring and empathetic people have been doing for ages. So if we were to look at these, I suppose, tenets of the anti-woke movement, and how might we correct them in order to expose what's the misinformation is, what the disinformation is, and so on. So let's take a look. Education, I'll just go back. Whoop. So indoctrination versus education. So there's nothing about indoctrination. It's what we're doing is when looking at critical race theory and queer inclusive curricula, is equipping learners with knowledge to be responsible and informed citizens in a diverse world. That's what the agenda is. And misinformation, disinformation, what we're needing to ask ourselves or remind each other is that we need to make sure that our opinions are rooted in facts, science, and accurate understanding, that we're not misquoting, that we're not rewriting, that we're not putting forward a platform that is completely erroneous and harmful. This idea about pseudoscience, making sure that we're basing our point of view on accurate and current scientific data. This idea of you're infringing on my right to freedom of speech. Well, there is freedom of speech, but what people forget is that freedom of speech comes with a responsibility. So it's really more of a responsibility than a right. And people forget that exercising freedom of speech in harmful ways comes with a price. It's not a license to promote hate. In fact, it can lead you into courts and spaces where criminal activity is reprimanded. The status quo is not working for everyone. It's wonderful that it's helping this group and that group, but we need to acknowledge the inequities and redress them. In terms of academic merit, the playing field is not level in education. It never has been. There are opportunity gaps. And so we need to take a look at the way that the system, the education system, along with a lot of our other institutions, maintain a particular hierarchy. I think someone mentioned hierarchy in a previous comment. In other words, that it seems to be catered to particular students from particular social groups, and that there are gaps that other marginalized students seem to be experiencing, and nothing is being done about it. And once again, inclusive curricula is always age appropriate. Any kind of curricula that's worth its salt will take into account the age, the cognitive and social emotional level of the learners.
So the message here is be woke. So we're telling teachers, just be woke. Those anti-woke people, They don't really have much of an argument. They don't know what they're talking about. They're just bigots. We're kind of used to that argumentation. Now, I do want to express that this video was slightly clipped for brevity. I'd invite you to go watch the longer version if you're interested in watching the longer version, because this video is just going to be clipped to bits to give you an idea of what they were talking about. In this training, the trainer, Kevin Bray, goes into an awful lot more detail about systemic oppression and how to address it. It's all very predictably social justice, as you would imagine. So I'm going to skip to toward the end of this training. Let's listen to what he has to say about teaching what he calls 2S LGBTQIA education. What, to be fair, it's really just queer theory in the education system. But let's see what he has to say about that.
But when we're talking about 2S LGBTQ plus or queer inclusive curricula, we're talking about that which helps students to understand what gender and sexual diversity is. The fact that it has been part of human beings' culture for eons. And then the impact of queer phobia is very seriously, and that there is a need for advocacy on the part of other students. Looking at the ways that queer people are marginalized. And what doesn't often happen, I think it's certainly because people are not necessarily knowledgeable, is that there is a presence of gender and sexual diversity in other species on the planet and culturally throughout history. So it's not about sexualizing students. It's not about trying to groom students, not trying to convert them to an alternative lifestyle. And some of you made reference to this in your comments. It's not about presenting topics that are not age appropriate. It's not about promoting a lifestyle or it's about affirming identities and creating safer learning spaces. So 2S LGBTQ plus inclusive curricula is not about teaching kids different kinds of sexual activity. It is about teaching kids about identities and how the experience of different identities is probably very different from what other kids experience, and understand the oppression, how it operates, and how allyship can take place. It's needed because queer youth are not often taught about queer history. And I believe, and I'll have to be corrected because I'm a bit out of the loop, it's still a problem in schools. They don't have school-based access to this information. The number of libraries and schools and otherwise that don't shelve information that queer youth can access and learn about who they are. School environments tend to be very heteronormative, and we need more learning environments where these kids feel welcome and where they have a chance to achieve better educational outcomes. One of the things that I learned from the students that I supported was that there's very little access to sex education that pertains to their lived experience. So they would tell me, well, Kevin, all I learn about is heterosexual sex. I don't learn about sex with someone of the same gender, so I don't know what to be careful of. I don't know what problems might pertain to my community, things that are particular to me, and the way that I express myself sexually. Huge problem.
Now, I don't know if you heard what I heard, but let me tell you what I heard. I heard, on the one hand, teaching apparently L2S LGBTQIA sex ed isn't about teaching sexual activity. So that's a good start. We're just teaching about different kinds of families. And to be fair, that sounds pretty all right. But at the end, isn't he just saying that queer inclusive sex education is about teaching sexual activity? That's what I heard in this. Okay, now let's move on to how to deal with parents.
So it's important to consult with your leadership team. And if you are in a situation where you are talking to a parent, guardian, or caregiver, and they're pushing back about what you're trying to do in the school, the trick is to not engage in debate. If you want to engage in debate, you can, but you're at risk of getting yourself caught in some quicksand. So rather than trying to change someone's mind, state the policy and what your responsibilities as an educator are, in reference to that policy. And I would stay on that track. Typically, what admin teams want you to do is they want you to report a particular conversation to them so they can address it. I've rarely have I seen an administrator leave it up to the teacher, and that can be very helpful. But I think the simple thing to do is to just reference as many times as you need to the policy and your responsibility.
And there you have it. There you have it. If you have a savvy parent who doesn't like what's going on, just refer to the policy. Don't debate them. Don't engage with them. They're bigots anyway because they're not as enlightened as us. Just say, well, look, it's my responsibility and it's in the policy. And this would be why it's really important to understand your school's policies, because clearly they get used and weaponized against parents who object to what's going on in school.
The other target is gender and sexual diversity in schools. And there's a big protest planned for Friday, I believe. And here we go again with individuals coming forward expressing their concerns about 2S LGBTQ plus curricula. And I don't know if any of you received information about it, but it's all over the internet, all over Facebook. So there's no dearth of information available.
I'm not going to read these out. I'll let you read them for yourself. I just want to point out that I find there's a lot of projection when it comes to social justice activists. Here, what Kevin is saying is that he really has the true knowledge of what these people want, right? What they're actually protesting, not what they're telling you. Don't believe what they're telling you. You can't do that because we have the enlightened knowledge. We understand that there's all this hidden oppression in the world and people don't even know that they're engaging in all of this stuff. They don't know how racist and homophobic and queerphobic they are, right? We have that special knowledge. So we really, truly understand what it is that they're protesting. Now, it could be that Kevin has spoken to individual protesters. I don't think he has, but it could be that he has. I can tell you that people from all walks of life have an issue with the social justice education that's going on in school. It's not just one particular group. For example, the vast majority, well, pretty much everyone that I know involved in this isn't anti-gay. And so grouping everyone, this 2S LGBTQ plus grouping, that is irrelevant. Most of the issue is around introducing inappropriate topics and materials to children at inappropriate ages. That, according to Kevin, is homophobic, but not according to other people who really don't have any issues with people being gay. It's just that sexualized materials at young ages is just not cool. Now, I'm sure you can all think about your own objections. I'm not going to go on too much about this, but I just wanted to make a couple points that there are many, many, many different people of many walks of life with many different viewpoints. Some of them could be bigoted. I'm not going to say that that's not a possibility, but a lot of them really aren't. And so grouping everyone in the same category, making assumptions about what they believe without reaching out and actually trying to understand individual people, or even understanding that the fact that this is going on and it's upsetting so many different kinds of people might be you and not them. Okay, now let's get to some of the juiciest bits at the end.
Or in a school, for those of you who used to work with me, I don't use the term equity committee anymore. I'm more interested in critical inquiry into practice. And I think having teams of teachers and administrators, and maybe even community members who are talking about social justice and human rights and how systems of oppression work can be really vital right now. And the reason why I like this name is because it doesn't talk about equity in kind of an oblique way, but you're really talking about what the activity of that particular teachers group will be about. And it's a critical inquiry into how we do business. And so I'll leave that with you in terms of a way of thinking as you go forward. And I'll be sharing information with you in the resource package. So I just want to take a little break and open up the floor. If there's any questions before we finish off, I just have a few more slides, but nothing too heavy. So if I can invite you to turn your cameras on if you like, and your microphones, and does anyone want to share any thoughts or wonderings or
So Kevin, oh sorry, Deb, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I appreciate that idea of renaming because we had a call out in my school for who wants to be on the equity committee. And it was like almost like equities have got a bad name now. Like people are just tired of all the stuff that's been given to us through PD and stuff. So I like that renaming. So I appreciate that.
Where have we seen this before? This renaming. People are fed up. Apparently, even teachers are fed up. And it seems like it's a small group of individuals who are keeping this alive. And how do you keep it alive when people are fed up with it? Certainly, you don't ask, well, maybe this is a mistake if everybody's so against it. No, no, no. You would not be a good social justice activist if you did that. No. You must rename it, repackage it, create a whole new way of delivering this very unpopular message. And isn't that funny that that way of packaging it away from equity is straight up calling it critical? And critical is critical pedagogy, critical theory. So let's just be blatant. It's just straight up Marxist ideology. Obviously, I saved the best for last. Now, listen very carefully to this question at the end.
Kevin, I just have a question about equity committee or something similar, but maybe with a different name. But I'm just wondering, in your experience, what can an effective equity committee kind of committee do for a school? Like, we don't have the power as teachers to change the curriculum, right? So even if you are a history teacher, if it's not in the curriculum in your district or your province or wherever you are, you can't change curriculum. So what are the kinds of things that an equity committee do in a school, in your experience?
well, when we talk about changing curricula, school boards can't change curricula either. It is prescribed by the ministry. However, within each subject area, there are ways in which you can integrate what I'm talking about tonight into the existing objectives. So they have, I'm a bit rusty now. It's like the overall objectives, which are quite, I would say, general, not as specific as the other objectives that are posted. And that is where some of the teachers that I've worked with would integrate anti-racist pedagogy, conversations and curricula related to equity and inclusion. So it's possible. And it's important to link it to those objectives because when a parent calls, and if they're a very savvy parent, what are you doing talking about pansexuals in your social studies class? And well, I'm covering and observing and respecting and implementing the objective as indicated in the English document, grade 11. And so there's always a way to do that. But your admin needs to be there as a support person. And I always, when I was leading equity teams, I always had an administrator present. It was very important for me to keep that relationship solid because then I could understand where they were at and how perhaps I could support them in their understanding, but also how they in turn could support the team and what we wanted to do at the school. So it's relationship building and all of that, but in this particular work, your relationships are critical.
Did you catch that? Did you catch what was said? The question is, how can we do this equity work? The answer is smuggle it in. Smuggle it in into completely unrelated lesson plans. Find a way to weave it in so that you can avoid any detection. Although, interestingly, it does seem to say do it with the support of your principal. But there you go. There you have it. They are, in fact, being advised by their fellow social justice educators to smuggle all this ideology into the classroom. It is not part of a lesson. It is not a equity lesson. It is injected into completely unrelated lessons, whether it's math or geography or literacy, because it's critical theory. Critical theory is not in the curriculum. It is smuggled in. It is a praxis. It is something that you do. It is something that you inject into a lesson. And it wasn't me telling you this time, it was them. Okay, well, there you have it. That is the end of my clips of this insane social justice teacher training that I attended last night. These people seem to really think they're better than you, they're enlightened, and they are going to smuggle all this in and call you a bigot, in their own words. Hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to like and subscribe and share these videos with as many parents or just regular people as possible. I highly encourage it. If you're going to another Million March, have a great March, and I'll see you in the next one.